A Prime Minister walks into a live TV interview ready to defend his party's budget. But within minutes, the whole political narrative shatters. Instead of confident answers, what follows is a glaring exposé of everything wrong with British politics today. Keir Starmer faced hard-hitting polling data that should send shockwaves through Westminster. The majority of viewers say this budget didn't just disappoint, it has ruined their Christmas and made them poorer. And watching Starmer's reaction, it's a masterclass in political collapse. Keir Starmer walked into GB News expecting an easy defence of Labour's latest budget. Instead, Christopher Hope, armed with unfiltered polling data, laid bare the harsh truth millions of British families are living every day. This budget hasn't just hurt abstract numbers on paper, it's wrecking real lives. Households tightening belts, businesses struggling to stay afloat, and families staring at bank statements that no longer add up. The overwhelming feeling. This budget has actively made people worse off, and Christmas, once a time of joy, now feels like a luxury many can't afford. Rachel Reeves might have crafted this budget with the intention of balancing books and social programmes, but what it delivered was a hammer blow to working families. Tax rises hit every corner of the country, squeezing incomes that were already stretched thin. From rising national insurance contributions to cuts that hit pensioners in winter, the impact is clear and immediate. People aren't just angry, they're frightened, frustrated and feeling utterly betrayed. Christopher Hope didn't come to GB News to ask soft questions or to let the Prime Minister off the hook. He placed polling data right in front of Starmer's face. Numbers that show an overwhelming majority of viewers believe this budget has made them poorer and ruined their Christmas. What should have been a moment for leadership quickly turned into a test of honesty and empathy. Would Starmer acknowledge the real pain people are feeling? Would he explain the difficult choices and show genuine understanding? No. Instead, what came next was a rehearsed defensive pivot that revealed everything wrong with today's political discourse. Starmer's first response was to talk about necessary and fair decisions and to ask people to make a contribution for the country. In simpler terms, we're taking your money, deal with it. This language is vague, passive and designed to guilt people into silence. It's exactly the kind of political spin that makes voters feel dismissed and unheard. The real kicker came with the NHS shield, the go-to deflection every politician pulls out when cornered. Starmer told viewers the extra money is protecting the NHS, something everyone cares about. And while healthcare is vital, this response was both patronising and evasive. Patronising because it implied people shouldn't worry about their financial struggles if the NHS is being protected. As if you can't care about both feeding your family and having access to healthcare. And evasive because it sidestepped the actual question, has this budget made people poorer? Instead, it tried to change the subject to something comfortable and politically untouchable. This is textbook deflection. You can love the NHS and still ask why your taxes have gone up so much. Yet Starmer treated these financial worries like they were selfish or short-sighted. It's like a friend borrowing money and when you ask for it back, they say, well, at least we're still friends, right? The friendship doesn't pay your rent, just like an NHS promise doesn't pay your grocery bills. Christopher Hope wasn't buying the deflection. He pushed Starmer with a question that cuts to the core of public frustration. Why are working people being taxed more to give money to those on benefits? This question isn't just political rhetoric. It's the exact conversation happening in kitchens and living rooms across the country. Hard-working people going to jobs every day, paying their taxes, only to be told now they're paying even more to support others who aren't working. It's a question Starmer had no good answer for. Instead, Starmer snapped back, defensive and irritated, repeating the usual political talking points, money going to the NHS, to schools, to living measures, whatever those might be. He was throwing everything at the wall, hoping something would stick. And then came the supposed trump card, lifting 500,000 children out of poverty. A noble goal, but used here as a moral shield to deflect from the uncomfortable truth. Nobody is arguing against helping children. But the question remains, why must that help come from squeezing working families harder? Using children as a shield in political debate is transparent and insulting to viewers' intelligence. It's a diversion, an emotional appeal designed to shut down dissent rather than engage with it. Social media exploded with criticism of this tactic, with people calling it a poor form of political manoeuvring and a clear sign of a government running out of answers. But the hypocrisy doesn't stop there. While Labour talks about protecting vulnerable children, they've cut winter fuel payments for pensioners. Elderly people on fixed incomes will face colder winters because their heating support is gone. This stark contradiction is impossible to ignore. You can't claim to care about poverty and vulnerability while forcing pensioners to choose between warmth and food. It's not a tough choice, it's a cruel one. What this interview really showed was the government scrambling, defensive and out of touch. Starmer's body language, his snapping tone, his inability to answer direct questions, all of it tells a story of panic. He knows the polling is catastrophic. He knows people are angry and he doesn't have real answers, only tired platitudes. Christopher Hope showed exactly what journalism should do: hold power to account, push for answers and refuse to accept vague political doublespeak. This wasn't an ambush, it was a necessary confrontation. The polling is damning. Most GB News viewers feel worse off, believe Christmas is ruined, and see this budget as a political disaster. These aren't just opinions, they are the lived realities of millions. Starmer's repeated lines about fairness and necessary contributions don't add up when people see their finances shrinking. This budget isn't fair and it isn't necessary for families already struggling. It's a policy failure, plain and simple. So the question remains, is this budget truly about protecting the vulnerable? Or is it about political convenience, choosing which groups to support and which to sacrifice? This interview exposed that uncomfortable truth. And until Labour can answer it honestly, the political fallout will only get worse. The fallout from that GB News interview didn't just expose Starmer's shaky grasp on public sentiment, it revealed the broader crisis of trust plaguing British politics. People are tired of being talked at, of politicians hiding behind platitudes and vague promises. They want real answers, real empathy, and real leadership. Instead, what they got was a government doubling down on the same tired script. We're protecting the NHS, we're helping children, everyone needs to make a contribution. But when pressed to explain how that contribution is fair, or why it disproportionately targets working families, the answers fall flat. It's no surprise the polling data shows a majority of Britons feeling worse off. They aren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. They are struggling to pay for essentials like food, heating and rent. The inflation squeeze combined with tax hikes is hitting ordinary people in their wallets. Many are cutting back on Christmas spending, not out of choice, but necessity. When Starmer claims this budget is necessary and fair, viewers see it differently. It's a heavy-handed redistribution that takes more from those already struggling to support others, while government spending priorities raise serious questions. This divide between political rhetoric and lived reality is dangerous when voters lose faith that their leaders understand their daily struggles. Political disengagement grows. People stop trusting the system because it feels rigged against them, and that's the real damage this budget is doing. Not just economic pain, but political alienation. Starmer's repeated attempts to deflect criticism onto the NHS or children aren't just weak, they're tone deaf. People don't reject support for the NHS or child poverty programmes. They reject being made scapegoats for it. They want to know why sacrifices fall so heavily on working families and pensioners, while billions flow elsewhere. Why are the poorest pensioners left out in the cold, literally, while headlines talk about lifting children out of poverty? That contradiction stings deeply and fuels resentment. The interview also highlighted a worrying pattern in Labour's approach, a reliance on moral grandstanding instead of policy substance. Using vulnerable groups as shields is a political tactic designed to shut down debate rather than engage with it. But voters aren't fooled. They see through the empty phrases, the recycled lines and the dodges. They want clarity on how policies will affect them, not platitudes about fairness or national contributions. Behind the scenes, political insiders are watching this poll data with alarm. Starmer's public persona as a calm, competent leader is under threat. The defensiveness and snapping seen on live TV reveal cracks in that carefully crafted image. When a Prime Minister can't handle tough questions from a journalist presenting clear data, it raises serious doubts about his ability to lead through real crises. Moreover, the Labour Party risked losing its core support base. Working families who believed in Labour's promises of fairness and support now feel betrayed. Businesses, especially small ones, are reeling under increased national insurance contributions and higher taxes, adding to the economic gloom. This budget, intended as a solution, is instead deepening divisions and driving discontent. And it's not just about policy. This interview reflected a political culture that's increasingly out of touch with ordinary voters. The habit of turning every difficult question into a moral appeal is exhausting. It assumes that voters won't question the narrative if it's wrapped in concern for children or the NHS. But voters do question it, and they're speaking louder than ever. The bigger picture here is about accountability. When voters see politicians evade direct questions and rely on scripted sound bites, trust erodes. The public wants transparency about tough choices, clear explanations about how budgets affect real people, and genuine acknowledgement of hardship. Starmer's refusal to engage meaningfully with the polling data or to express real empathy for those struggling reveals a gap between political leadership and public experience. In short, the interview was a mirror held up to British politics, a system where rhetoric often masks reality and where politicians prioritise political convenience over honest dialogue. The polling data that Christopher Hope presented wasn't just a challenge to Starmer, it was a warning to all of Westminster. The public is watching and they are not satisfied. This is a pivotal moment. If Labour continues to ignore the real impact of its policies and resorts to deflection and moral posturing, it risks alienating a broad swath of voters, and that could have consequences not just for the party, but for the future of British democracy itself. The question now is whether Starmer and his team can listen not just to pollsters and political advisors, but to the voices of ordinary people who are struggling to get by. Can they move beyond rehearsed lines and genuinely address the financial pain caused by this budget? Because if they don't, the backlash will only deepen. Politics isn't just about numbers or policies, it's about people. And right now, millions of people feel unheard and unprotected. That's the real crisis laid bare in that explosive GB News interview. The Starmer interview on GB News didn't just expose his weaknesses, it exposed a much deeper problem in British politics. The disconnect between the government and the people has never been more apparent. While politicians trade phrases about fairness and necessary contributions, millions of families watch their budgets shrink and their futures grow uncertain. The idea that people should quietly accept tax rises and budget cuts because it's for the greater good is wearing thin. People want honesty, not platitudes. Starmer's defensive tone and repeated pivoting to the NHS and children show that he knows the political ground beneath him is unstable. The polling isn't just bad, it's catastrophic. It's a loud, undeniable signal that the public feels betrayed by a budget that claims to help, but in reality squeezes the very people it should protect. The anger and frustration from voters aren't abstract. They come from real sacrifices being made at kitchen tables across the country. What made the interview so striking was how Starmer's responses didn't answer the core questions. When asked why working people are being taxed more to support those on benefits, the answer was evasive and incomplete. Instead of addressing the fairness of wealth redistribution head-on, Starmer retreated to talking points that focused on protecting the NHS and lifting children out of poverty. While those goals are important, they don't justify the growing financial pain felt by working families and pensioners alike. The criticism from social media was swift and scathing. People saw through the think of the children defence for what it is, a deflection meant to silence dissent. It's a tactic that insults people's intelligence and ignores the complexity of real economic hardship. Nobody wants children to suffer, but nobody wants to be told that their own struggles don't matter because of it. And the pensioner issue, that's a political landmine. Cutting winter fuel payments while boasting about lifting children out of poverty sends a brutal message about who's suffering the government values. Elderly people who have paid into the system all their lives are now forced to choose between heating and eating. That's not leadership. That's cruelty dressed up as fiscal responsibility. This disconnect is a disaster for Labour politically. They risk alienating not just one group, but multiple core voter bases, working families, pensioners, and small businesses. Instead of uniting people with a vision of fairness and support, the budget is dividing the country. And Starmer's inability to handle direct, uncomfortable questions only deepens the crisis. The way Starmer snapped at Christopher Hope showed more than just frustration. It revealed a government on edge. Instead of calmly explaining the budget's complexities and acknowledging its painful effects, Starmer chose defensiveness and avoidance. That tells the public he's unsure of the justification for these policies. When a leader can't hold steady in a live interview, it shakes confidence across the nation. This moment isn't just about Starmer or this budget, it's about the state of political accountability in the UK. The public demands transparency and honesty, not rehearsed talking points and emotional appeals. They want leaders who recognise their struggles, not dismiss them with vague promises or moral posturing. The polling data presented by Christopher Hope is a stark reminder. People are watching closely and they aren't satisfied. They see the cuts, feel the tax hikes, and know the government's promises don't match their experience. The gap between political spin and reality is widening, and if left unaddressed, it could lead to a wave of political unrest. Labour faces a critical choice. They can continue with the same approach, ignoring direct questions, relying on moral shields, and dismissing public frustration, or they can listen, engage honestly, and rebuild trust. The stakes couldn't be higher. British politics is at a crossroads, and how leaders respond now will shape the country's future. This interview on GB News was more than just a confrontation. It was a moment of truth. It stripped away the carefully constructed image of leadership and showed a government struggling to justify its decisions. For millions of Britons feeling the pinch, it was confirmation that their voices are not being heard at the highest levels. The real question now is whether the Labour government will rise to the challenge or continue down a path of defensiveness and denial, because the public's patience is running out. The polling isn't just a snapshot, it's a warning, and ignoring it won't make the crisis go away. The GB News interview didn't just expose Starmer's weaknesses, it shone a harsh light on a wider political crisis gripping Britain. The reality is simple but brutal. Millions of people are struggling financially and their elected leaders are failing to meet the moment. When the public says the budget has ruined their Christmas and made them poorer, that's not political noise. It's a genuine cry of frustration and fear. What's deeply troubling is how the government's responses often feel disconnected from those real experiences. Talking about fair contributions and necessary decisions sounds official and reasonable in political speeches, but when you're juggling bills or deciding between heating and food, it feels cold and out of touch. Starmer's repeated defence of the budget using the NHS and children as shields misses the point. People want fairness, clarity and respect for their hardships. This interview exposed the fault lines running through Labour's approach. There's a growing perception that the government chooses which groups to protect based on political convenience rather than fairness. Supporting children is obviously important, but not at the expense of pensioners freezing this winter or working families sinking deeper into debt. That selective empathy fuels anger and distrust. It also reveals a political style that leans too heavily on emotional appeals rather than hard facts and clear explanations. Voters aren't impressed by moral grandstanding. They want to understand how policies will affect their lives and why sacrifices are necessary. Starmer's evasive answers and defensive tone only deepen doubts about his leadership and the credibility of his government. Looking ahead, this moment is a warning for everyone in Westminster. People are more aware and less willing to accept spin. They're watching closely and demanding accountability. Politicians who ignore that risk losing not just elections, but the very trust that holds democracy together. For Labour, the challenge is immense. They need to rebuild trust with working families and pensioners alike by addressing their concerns honestly and meaningfully. They must move beyond vague slogans and provide real solutions to the financial pressures facing millions. Without that, the political fallout will continue to grow. But it's not just about one party. This interview and the surrounding backlash highlight a broader problem in British politics. A disconnect between political elites and everyday people. The age of simple messaging and rehearsed lines is over. Citizens want leaders who listen, who empathise, and who can admit when things are tough instead of hiding behind slogans. The real test for Starmer and his government is whether they can change course. Can they acknowledge the pain caused by this budget and offer genuine support and clarity? Or will they continue to rely on deflections and moral posturing that only deepen the public's frustration? What's clear is that British politics is at a critical juncture. This isn't just about numbers or policies, it's about trust, respect and leadership. The public has spoken through those damning polls and the message couldn't be clearer. They want real answers, real empathy and real change. If that doesn't happen, the consequences will be severe. Not just for Labour, but for the whole political system. People are angry, feeling unheard and squeezed harder than ever. They want leaders who stand with them, not above them. So the question remains, will Starmer rise to this challenge, or will the political fallout from this budget continue to spiral? The future of British politics depends on the answer.